The champagne flutes clinked around the table as Thomas's father, Richard Bennett, stood to make a toast. The private dining room at Le Château littered with crystal and old money, making my simple black dress feel woefully inadequate. To my son Thomas and his interesting choice of bride, Richard announced, his eyes sliding over me with poorly concealed disapproval. May your union be as successful as Bennett Development has been for the past 30 years. Polite laughter rippled through the gathering of Thomas's family, all successful executives, lawyers, and doctors. I smiled tightly, feeling Thomas's hand squeeze mine under the table. We'd been dating for 2 years, but this was my first formal introduction to his extended family. So far, it wasn't going well. So Olivia, Thomas's Aunt Margaret leaned forward, pearls swinging. Thomas mentioned you work in events, planning parties, and such. I own Mitchell Wedding Planning, I clarified. We specialize in luxury destination weddings. How quaint, she replied with a tight smile. I suppose someone has to organize these things. Before I could respond, Richard chimed in from across the table. A wedding planner? That's barely a real job. He laughed heartily, looking around for support, which his family eagerly provided. What's your annual revenue? 50,000. 100 if you're lucky. I felt my cheeks burn. My company had grossed $1.2 million last year, but I wasn't about to justify myself to these people. Now, Richard, Thomas's mother Elizabeth interjected with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Don't be rude. At least she's pretty. The table erupted in laughter again, as if Elizabeth had made a generous concession. Thomas finally spoke up, his voice tight with anger. Mom, Dad, that's enough. Olivia is incredibly successful at what she does. Richard waved his hand dismissively. No offense intended. It's just that in this family, we have certain expectations. The Bennett name opens doors, and we've all worked hard to maintain our reputation in Chicago's business community. Speaking of business, Thomas's brother Maxwell cut in, clearly trying to change the subject. How's the lakefront tower project coming along, Dad? Richard's expression clouded momentarily before he recovered. Just some temporary financing hurdles. Nothing to worry about. We're meeting with Midwest National next week for the construction loan. The conversation shifted to safer territory, but the damage was done. Throughout the meal, the subtle digs continued. Comments about my middle-class upbringing, questions about whether I'd be playing with flowers and dresses forever, and speculation about whether I could adapt to the Bennett lifestyle. Later that night in our apartment, Thomas apologized profusely. They're snobs, Liv. I'm so sorry. Once they get to know you, they'll see how amazing you are. I wasn't so sure. The Bennetts had made it clear they thought Thomas was slumming it with a mere wedding planner. What they didn't know, what almost no one knew, was exactly who Mitchell Wedding Planning's clients were or who my family really was. 3 weeks later, I was in my downtown office reviewing a contract for a Saudi prince's daughter's wedding when my personal phone rang. The caller ID showed Mitchell Financial Holdings. Hi, Dad, I answered, swiveling to look out at the Chicago skyline. Olivia, how's my favorite entrepreneur? My father's warm voice was a balm after the previous weeks of cold interactions with the Bennetts. Busy. The Sheikh Al Fayed's wedding is going to be our biggest event yet. 400 guests, 3 days of celebrations. That's my girl. Listen, something interesting crossed my desk today. Bennett Development has applied for an emergency construction loan. Apparently, their primary lender pulled out at the last minute, and they're scrambling to keep their lakefront tower project afloat. I straightened in my chair. My father, Jonathan Mitchell, wasn't just any banker. He was the CEO of Mitchell Financial Holdings, one of the largest private banking institutions in the Midwest. Our family had been in banking for 3 generations, managing wealth for some of the most influential families and governments around the world. Is that so? I kept my voice neutral, though my mind was racing. Yes. Quite a substantial amount, $24 million. The loan committee flagged it because of some concerning fluctuations in their recent project's profitability. They're overleveraged, and you're telling me this because... My father chuckled. The loan officer noticed your name connected to Thomas Bennett in our family office records. He thought there might be a potential conflict of interest, given your engagement. I twirled a pen between my fingers, thinking, do the Bennetts know who you are? Who we are? Apparently not. Richard Bennett addressed his application to the loan committee with all the confidence of a man who assumes approval is a foregone conclusion. The irony wasn't lost on me. The Bennetts, for all their posturing about family connections and business acumen, had no idea that my father controlled a financial institution with assets exceeding $50 billion. My quaint wedding planning business was simply my passion project, something I'd built from scratch without using the Mitchell name or connections. What are you planning to do about the loan? I asked carefully. That depends. The application has merit, but it's borderline. Their financials show they've been spending lavishly, while their last few projects came in over budget. The committee could go either way. He paused. Though I must say, Richard Bennett's reputation for arrogance precedes him. They're not good people, Dad, I said quietly, remembering the humiliation of that dinner. Thomas is different, but his family. They made it very clear they think I'm beneath them. Another pause. I see, my father's voice had cooled considerably. Then perhaps Mr. Bennett should learn that appearances can be deceiving. 2 days later, my father called again. The loan committee has made their decision. Given the risk factors, Midwest National is declining Bennett Development's application. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also concern for Thomas. Will they find financing elsewhere? Possibly, but not quickly and not at favorable rates. Our rejection will raise red flags for other lenders. Richard Bennett made quite a scene when he received the news. Demanded to speak to the bank president. And did he? My father's laugh held an edge. Indeed. I took his call personally. I may have mentioned that our risk assessment was thorough, and that perhaps he should be more careful about dismissing people based on their occupations. Dad, you didn't. I also suggested that if he needed character references in the future, his future daughter-in-law comes from a family with considerable financial expertise. I closed my eyes, imagining Richard Bennett's face as realization dawned. How did he react? Let's just say I don't think you'll have any more problems with the Bennetts underestimating you. Richard's exact words were, Mitchell, as in Mitchell Financial Holdings. The silence afterward was rather satisfying. That evening, Thomas called me, his voice tight with stress. My father wants to have dinner with us tomorrow night. Just you, me, and my parents. He was unusually insistent. The next night found us at the Capitol Grill, a significant step down from Le Château, but still upscale. Richard and Elizabeth Bennett were already seated when we arrived. Richard stood immediately, something he hadn't bothered to do at our previous dinner. Olivia, Thomas, thank you for joining us on such short notice. His smile looked painful. Elizabeth was equally transformed, reaching out to squeeze my hand. Lovely to see you again, dear. That's a beautiful dress. Throughout the appetizers, the conversation remained painfully polite, with Richard and Elizabeth asking thoughtful questions about my business and commenting on how entrepreneurial spirit was so admirable. Thomas looked increasingly confused by his parents' behavior. Finally, as our main courses arrived, Richard cleared his throat. Olivia, I believe I owe you an apology. My comments at our last dinner were inappropriate and uninformed. I've recently come to understand that appearances can be deceiving. Elizabeth nodded vigorously. We were terribly rude and we're deeply sorry. Thomas glanced between his parents and me. What's going on here? You two have never apologized for anything in your lives. Richard's smile tightened. Let's just say I've had a humbling business experience recently. Our lakefront project ran into some financing issues. I said neutrally, cutting into my steak. Midwest National declined your loan application. Richard's eyebrows shot up. Yes, how did you? My father mentioned it. Your father, Richard repeated carefully. Jonathan Mitchell. Thomas put down his fork. Wait, Mitchell as in? Mitchell Financial Holdings, I confirmed. My family has been in banking for 3 generations. My great-grandfather founded what became MFA in 1927. The color drained from Elizabeth's face. But your wedding planning business is something I built myself because I love it. Our clients include royal families, tech billionaires, and celebrities who value privacy and discretion. That's why you won't find our portfolio splash across social media. Richard looked like he'd swallowed something sour. So when I said that being a wedding planner is barely a real job, yes, that was unfortunate timing, considering my father was reviewing your loan application the following week. The bank president I spoke with, Richard said slowly. That was your father? I nodded, taking a sip of wine. He mentioned you had a memorable conversation. Thomas was staring at me. Liv, why didn't you tell me who your family was? I turned to him, momentarily concerned. We'd never discussed my family's wealth because it had never seemed important to our relationship. Would it have mattered? Of course not, he said immediately. I could have prepared better for meeting your parents, and I would have warned my family not to act like such entitled jerks. Richard cleared his throat again. About the loan. I don't suppose. The loan decision was made by the committee based on financial considerations, I said firmly. My father doesn't overturn sound business decisions for personal reasons. That said, he mentioned your application had merit, despite some concerning patterns in your recent projects. Hope flickered in Richard's eyes. If you're willing to adjust your business plan to address those concerns and perhaps scale back some of the more extravagant elements of the design, Mitchell Financial might reconsider a modified proposal. That would be extremely generous, Richard said, humility sitting awkwardly on him like an ill-fitting suit. Elizabeth leaned forward. We really are sorry, Olivia. Our behavior was inexcusable. I wasn't entirely convinced of their sincerity, but I was willing to give them a chance, for Thomas's sake. I accept your apology, I said finally, and I hope we can start fresh. But understand this, I'm proud of the business I've built. I don't need the Mitchell name or fortune to validate my work. Thomas reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it supportively. Richard nodded slowly. I'm beginning to see that, and I'm beginning to understand why my son chose you. 6 months later, our wedding took place at the Mitchell family estate outside Chicago. Thanks to my connections and yes, my wedding planning expertise, it was featured in Vogue as the society wedding of the year. Though most guests had no idea who had actually planned every perfect detail. The Bennetts had been on their best behavior since that dinner, though I occasionally caught glimpses of their true nature slipping through. Richard had secured a modified loan through Mitchell Financial, with stricter oversight and more conservative projections, and the lakefront project was back on track. During the reception, my father found me for a father-daughter dance. Happy? He asked as we swayed to the music. Very, I confirmed. Though I'm still not entirely convinced the Bennetts have changed their minds about me. They're just afraid to show it now. My father smiled. People like Richard Bennett respect power and money above all else. It's not ideal, but it's a start. Give them time to appreciate you for who you are. And if they don't, then they're fools, and Thomas is lucky to have escaped their narrow worldview. He spun me gently. But I think they're learning. Richard called me last week to discuss the possibility of Mitchell Financial handling their corporate banking going forward. He mentioned, and I quote, we could learn a thing or two about business management from the Mitchells. I laughed. That must have cost him. Undoubtedly. My father's expression grew serious. You know, I've always been proud that you insisted on making your own way. Building Mitchell wedding planning from scratch, refusing to use our connections. I needed to know I could do it myself. And you have. Spectacularly. Though I must admit, watching Richard Bennett realize exactly who he'd been dismissing did provide a certain satisfaction. As the dance ended, I looked across the reception to where Thomas was chatting with my mother, his expression animated and genuine. He caught my eye and smiled, that same warm smile that had first attracted me to him years ago, before I knew he was a Bennett or he knew I was a Mitchell. Richard and Elizabeth stood nearby, still somewhat uncomfortable but making an effort. They had learned an important lesson. Never judge someone's worth by appearances alone. Sometimes the wedding planner you're dismissing comes from one of the most powerful financial families in the Midwest. But more importantly, sometimes she's built something valuable all on her own, regardless of her last name. That night, as Thomas and I danced under the stars at the reception I had meticulously planned, I realized that the sweetest revenge wasn't in watching the Bennett squirm, but in knowing my own worth, with or without the Mitchell fortune behind me. What are you thinking about? Thomas asked, noticing my smile. Just that appearances can be deceiving, I replied, and that's not always a bad thing. He laughed, spinning me under the twinkling lights. Here's to surprising people for the rest of our lives. I couldn't have planned it better